We're delighted to have Mr. Ken Chenault with us today. He is the chairman and managing director of General Catalyst. He's also co-founder of OneTen, both of which we will talk about during our conversation today. He also, of course, is the longtime CEO of American Express. Ken, thank you so much for being with us.
Well, it's great to be with you, David.
Let's start with responsible innovation, something that you are an advocate for. I'm not sure all of us are familiar with it. Give us a sense about what responsible innovation means.
I think what's important here is, one, to first talk about what it is not. So responsible innovation is not an ESG policy. We think ESG is absolutely critical, but we also think that responsible innovation needs to be at the heart of our business and our approach to investing. So one of the points I would emphasize, David, is I believe companies exist because society allows us to exist. And we have a responsibility to improve society. Now, when we're doing due diligence on companies, we're going through financial due diligence, we're going through customer due diligence. But what we need to do is go through social due diligence. And the important point is technology has advanced tremendously. With AI, with machine learning, we should be able to anticipate the impact of our actions and strategies on the broader society. So what we have proposed and what we're doing with our companies and founders is we've said, let's focus on a framework. So when we are developing a business, when we're building a business, in addition to understanding the strategic moves we need to make, let's understand what's the impact of our technology. Does it leave some people behind? Does it marginalize some people? How do we ensure that companies test the effects of innovation on a broader array of stakeholders? And how do we build guardrails to anticipate and protect against potential harm? So that's the economic opportunity and inclusion. We also look at the environment and sustainability. And we have an insistence to say, let's develop this at the outset. And third, we want a commitment to openness and diversity and privacy and safety.
So, Ken, it strikes me that you referred to ESG. We typically think about the environmental social governance in terms of large, established, publicly traded companies. They're all out there. Now, how can we direct them at this point? You're talking to some extent about at the very beginning, before the company even exists, what is it going to be? At the same time, the innovation we've thought about has been sort of unlimited. That's part of what's given rise, impetus to a lot of creativity. How can you still have that creativity and energy and have it be limited by the responsible part?
So here's what I would say, David, is I think the point that we emphasize is, and the term we use is mindfulness of impact. I think few people start a company saying, I don't care what the impact has on the broader society. But what we don't have is a level of intentionality. And I think in the venture world, in the startup world, let's get it right in the beginning. So let's understand we're developing a product or service or capability. What's going to be the broader impact? These are questions that need to be asked in the beginning. And I don't think that they will slow down the process if done appropriately. But what I do think that we won't be in a situation where people will say 5 years after the company has developed a product or service is what the heck happened? We had no idea what this impact was going to be. I think you can ask those questions in the beginning.
What form does this responsible innovation take? And by that, I mean, is this a set of principles or guidelines? Is it actually an institution that can consult with people? How does it exist?
It's a good question. We are just starting this initiative, but what we are focused on is developing this framework that I outlined. We are working with companies as we do on developing their financial strategy and their business strategy. And at some point, we will probably bring in some third parties to help us measure, because I do think it is critical to make sure that we are focused on the right areas, and we're monitoring the progress that needs to be made here.
Have you done any market testing, if I can put it that way? I mean, talking to founders or angel investors to get their reaction, get their thoughts. Is there receptivity or is there some resistance?
So what I would say is we're taking very much of a startup mentality here, and we are absolutely talking to founders. We're working with founders. We have found an incredibly positive reaction. Founders, in fact, want to be involved in missions that are going to have a positive impact, but they haven't focused enough on the framework and the steps that they need to take to make it happen.
Does this responsible innovation apply more readily to some areas of business and less to others? And let me ask you more provocatively, might there be some startups that cannot be responsible in innovation? By their very nature of what they're about, they're not going to be that good for society.
Here's my view, David, is I think the vast majority of businesses that are starting up would benefit by having this framework. What we're not going to do is prescribe and say, this business is good, this business is bad. The marketplace will decide that, but what we believe is if we focus on this framework, we're going to be developing businesses that will have a higher probability of having a positive impact on our society and will be commercially successful, because we believe that you can grow, you can have a very successful commercial enterprise, and if your focus is on building enduring companies, then you need to, in fact, build companies that will have a positive impact on society.
By the way, what's the next step for you? Or another way to put it is, if I'm a founder, if I'm an angel investor, I'm thinking about something, how do I tap into this?
Please reach out to me, reach out to our partners at General Catalyst, and we'd love to talk to you about responsible innovation, whether you are a portfolio company of ours or not. We also hope to enlist partners across the venture community and the technology sector.
So, Ken, let's talk about the other title that I gave you about the co-founder of
Yes.
OneTen. I think a lot of us are not familiar yet with OneTen. Explain what OneTen is.
So let me talk a little bit about the origin of OneTen. And the origin of OneTen was the day after the murder of George Floyd. Obviously, that was very devastating. And Ken Frazier, the chairman and CEO of Merck, and I, who we've known each other since law school, and we were talking about what could we do? And what we said is the area that we think we could have a real impact is on employment for Blacks in America. And we also said, what's one of the systemic issues that's out there? And that is some of the job requirements are not relevant to the actual performance of the job. 75% of Black Americans who are eligible for jobs do not have a 4-year college degree. That's a real issue. What we felt very strongly is that there was a need to get corporations collectively focused on this issue with a very specific target: 1 million jobs in 10 years. And what that meant was that each company had to make a financial commitment for 10 years and a jobs commitment for 10 years. Because we've got to be persistent at this, David. Many companies have tried this on their own. A few have been successful, but the reality is collectively, large companies have not done a great job on diversity. And part of it is we have to be more innovative and develop some approaches that will allow more Blacks to be in family-sustaining wages. There's nothing more ennobling than, in fact, to have a job. But it can't be a dead-end job. And so we've been incredibly pleased with the receptivity. We now have over 40 companies in the Fortune 500 who have signed up for this 10-year commitment. And we also are organizing the job supplier network, if you will, to work together with companies. We have an outstanding CEO, Maurice Jones, who is really going to do a fantastic job, and we announced him a month ago.
So, Ken, it strikes me one very important thing you mentioned there was families sustaining jobs. Because I know from my experience in corporate America, sometimes we'd look at our overall numbers, they were not that bad at all. But then if you looked at it, an awful lot of more entry-level jobs, and they tended not to move above entry-level jobs. How do you address that issue?
So one of the things that we're doing is we're working very closely with a range of providers that have some demonstrated best practices to move people forward. So this is a very comprehensive effort. It's not just focused on the recruitment of people, but it also is focused on upskilling and the movement. And I think, David, what's absolutely critical for all of us to understand is that some of the specifications that we have on jobs, for example, that require a college degree, when you do the analysis, IBM, for example, has done some very good work. And by the way, the former CEO, Ginny Rometty, is co-chair of OneTen with Ken Frazier. But IBM has done an extensive amount of analysis and put it in practice of rescoping and respecking jobs. And that's going to not only benefit Black Americans, that's going to benefit everybody because we're going to open up the aperture of opportunity.
1 million jobs, even over 10 years, is a big number. I mean, it's a substantial number. How do you find the candidates? Do individual companies find the candidates, or does OneTen help screen and find the right people who really have the capacity?
We're going to work with companies who find the candidates. We're going to find the candidates. We're going to work with a range of for-profit and not-for-profit organizations across the country. So this is a very comprehensive effort. And we have been very, very heartened by the reaction we've gotten from both the private sector and the nonprofit sector. People really feel that there is a need for an organization like OneTen. And we look at this, David, frankly, as a movement.
And give me the description of the prime candidate. Who's the archetype of the candidate you're looking for?
You know, I want to be careful in the sense that it's basically anyone of working age. So 18 and up. I think we're probably going to find that segment in the late 20s to maybe mid 40s. But the reality is we're focused on all segments that can move into family sustaining wages because we're also helping companies with their existing Black employees of how they can upskill and move them up. So this is a comprehensive effort.
You said you have 40 companies in the Fortune 500 right now.
Yes.
Do you have a goal?
You know, I think that I would comfortably feel that we're going to get over 100 companies, and these are large companies. Ideally, David, what we want to do is we want to move this to midsize and small businesses because I do think this can be comprehensive. We started with large companies because of the scale, and we could get it up relatively quickly, but this is something that we would like to broaden.
And you can be able to have more of a difference in mid-size and smaller companies because they typically don't have the resources. They don't have big HR departments. They don't have these programs, unlike some of the big publicly traded companies.
You're absolutely right, David. Part of it, I think we're going to find is the infrastructure that we put together we want to make sure it's flexible enough that we will be able to broaden to mid-sized companies and small businesses. And I absolutely agree with you that we can be tremendously value added to both small business and mid-sized companies.
So this is talking about entry level and above entry level, moving
And
people
above,
up the
yes.
chain.
Yes.
Let's talk about the top of the chain, because this is something that is much discussed, have been for a long time. I'm not sure how much progress we've really made at the top of the companies, and that's C-suite, that's boards, you name it, in terms of really having diversity and inclusion. You have a lot of experience with this, Ken. Where are we at this point? Do you think we have made progress?
I think we've made some progress, but if you look at the numbers, it's disappointing. So, David, there were more Black CEOs in the early 2000s than there are now. I think there were at one point 10 or 11 Black CEOs. I think there are 4. Ken Frazier stepping down from Merck after an incredible career, terrific CEO. But the reality is you would have hoped that we would have had 30 CEOs of people of color. That has not happened. I would say as we look at the pipeline of the feeder group who could become CEOs, the pipeline is not very good. And I think what's important here, people ask me, what are all the steps we need to take? The point that I make is that what's critical is this comes down to leadership. And there's some CEOs who have been in place for 10, 15, 20 years who tell me there's a pipeline issue. And I say, excuse me, you're controlling the pipeline. You're controlling who gets into the pipeline. And so what's very important is you have to not just establish this as a communications priority, you have to make sure that you're holding people accountable for driving that change. So one is, I think, you've got to educate people on the awareness level that they need to have. Second is, for this upper rung, you can be very focused. You can say, who are 10 people in my organization that I think have the capabilities to move up and really make sure that getting the mentoring, the job assignments, you're holding them highly accountable for performance. But I don't think we've had this focus and we haven't held people accountable.
There's obviously a moral, a social responsibility aspect to this. I wonder if there's also, believe it or not, a competitive aspect. I mean, I worked for Tom Murphy when he was chairman of Cap Cities ABC, a great executive. And we used to have an annual meeting of the senior management. And one year, this was back in the early 90s, he came back and he said, you know, I looked around that room and I realized we didn't have half of the brains in the country. And he was talking about women specifically because there were so few women. And he said, this doesn't make sense to me. We're leaving half the brains behind. Can we convince leadership that, in fact, you can compete on being more diverse and more inclusive?
Yeah, I think it's been demonstrated very strongly. You have a more diverse leadership group, you're going to have a better performing company. And it's critical to make sure that we're leveraging all of the human resources that we have in this country and in the world. And I just think that the type of focus that Tom had, that's the focus that we need to have on race.
Is it at all a generational issue? Do you have hopes for the next generation they'll have a different view about this?
I'm mixed. I think in some cases I feel better, but if we look at the technology sector, where we have a number of young people in key positions, in certain cases, the diversity is worse. So I think we got to keep the pressure on and make sure that we're holding people accountable.
Yeah, it certainly sounds right. Although we've been talking about it a long time, we haven't made the progress we should have. Ken, thank you so very much. It's always great to talk to you. And these wonderful new initiatives that you have undertaken. That is Ken Chenault, long-term CEO of American Express. And now he is chairman and managing director of General Catalyst, as well as co-founder of OneTen.
Thank you, David.